Good evening and welcome to the Toronto Debating Society. Tonight is Tuesday, December the 4th, 2012. This is a cross-examination debate. The resolution is electric cars are a fad. The first speaker is the Prime Minister, Dave, and he will speak to us for 5 minutes. Please welcome Dave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, encouraging Ontarians to choose electric vehicles is a part of our government's plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's Ontario Transportation Minister Bob Chiarelli. Well, electric cars were invented in 1833, but there's been an unprecedented interest in it lately. In fact, the Ontario provincial government announced its vision for 1 out of every 20 cars to be electrically powered by 2020. And businesses are spending billions of dollars in producing these electric vehicles. Media reports are abound, but when's the last time you've heard reports from actual consumers? You haven't, because electric cars are a fad. We've defined electric cars as passenger vehicles that are fueled solely by electricity and refueled via electrical outlet only. R means currently, and fad is a practice or interest followed for a time with exaggerated zeal. So, why is it a fad? The first point, the environmental benefits of electric cars are exaggerated. Electricity still comes from somewhere. And if we look at where it comes from for us in North America, if I specifically look at the United States, which is really spearheading this initiative, well, 44.5% of electricity in the States comes from coal, and a total of 69.5% comes from fossil fuels. So are we really improving the emissions, or are we merely just shifting them from tailpipes to central generating stations that burn the same fossil fuels? Some studies actually even show that electric vehicles could be even more damaging to the environment because the production of electric vehicles are more labor intensive than a simple gas-powered vehicle as we have now. And if emissions really are the purpose of electric vehicle promotion, then why are we not looking at other options such as partial zero emission vehicles, or PZEV? These types of vehicles are 90% cleaner burning regular gas than normal cars, just because it adds a second catalytic converter to the vehicle. You can actually buy one of these today. Subaru makes them for an extra $700. You can be burning over 90% cleaner tailpipe emissions. So that's clearly a solution without the added cost of electric vehicles. And furthermore, the US and Canadian government have already set standards to improve emissions and mileage by 80% by the year 2025. So clearly they recognize there is a solution using gas-powered vehicles. So the concept of it being green really needs to be looked at carefully. Secondly, it's clearly a fad because it's not being adopted by consumers. At the end of the day, it's the consumer's dollars that will determine whether or not it becomes a mainstay product. Firstly, there's no infrastructure for electric vehicles. Probably one of the first things you think about is, what if I get stuck by the side of the road? A tow truck can't bring electricity to your vehicle like it brings gas. Also, if you're looking to charge your vehicle at home, well, that's going to be another $2,000 power charger that you have to buy to install in your own house just to charge the vehicle that you bought. So the Toronto Hydro chief, Anthony Haynes, has already said, if you connect 10% of homes with an electric vehicle, the electric system fails. So why are we promoting the use of electric vehicles when we don't even have the infrastructure to handle them? Secondly, it's not being adopted because electric vehicles are cost prohibitive. A Nissan Leaf is $38,400 to start. And the comparable vehicle to that is the Nissan Versa, which is $14,700. So we're looking at over a $20,000 difference. And for consumers, would we want to pay an extra $20,000 for the possibility that it might save a little bit of carbon emissions, depending which electricity grid you're connected to? And even with And even with the electric vehicle promotions that the government has promoted, are rebates, $8,500 if you buy one of these vehicles. Well, that cost is actually burdened among all of us in this room. That $8,500 is all of us sharing the cost for someone who wants a novelty car, being an electric car, to say that they're being greener than the regular vehicles. So this dramatic cost means that ultimately the end consumers will not switch over to electric vehicles, and therefore, as we have it now, electrical vehicles are a fad. Thank you.
Please welcome the Leader of the Opposition, Michael, to the podium to question the Prime Minister for 2 minutes. Dave, and after Michael is finished questioning Dave, he will present his arguments.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Government, you quote these low figures, and yet your definition talks about fad as being currently enjoying an exaggerated zeal. I'm curious to know this contradiction of yours. If the figures are so low, how can you call this a period of exaggerated zeal?
Because the government is spending billions of dollars, and ultimately, if there was no interest in electric vehicles, then why are we allowing the government to spend billions of dollars, and on the other hand, business spending billions of dollars?
Excuse me, but you're not answering the question. The point is that the low vehicle sales cannot go along with what you are now calling a period of exaggerated zeal. That was the question.
There is exaggerated interest all in the media. Everyone's heard about electric cars. There clearly is an exaggerated interest in electric cars.
Okay. Now, you also, when I bought my high-def television, it was $3,100. You can now buy the same TV for $350. We all know that as products gain acceptance and start selling more, the price goes significantly down. What proof do you have that the costs for electric vehicles won't go down as sales go up? What's your proof?
There is no proof that they won't go down.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question. Every major car company either has or is spending billions. Every single company, including BMW in Canada and Cadillac, are spending billions to either develop ones they have or to get. Every car company will have an electric. Is that how you define a fad?
Well, I define the fad. It's a fad because the government wants 350,000 electrical vehicles within the next 8 years. And last year we sold 193.
What the government wants has nothing to do with fads. They didn't want fins of cars in the 50, but they happened anyways. It sounds like your argument is based on amazing Google research, but did you actually look at the logic of any of this?
I certainly haven't.
Ladies and gentlemen, a nice effort on the part of the government, no question. I believe they narrowed the focus of this debate by excluding hybrids. I think excluding hybrids from a debate about electric vehicles is like having a debate about the future of aviation, but excluding jet planes from the discussion. But we're going to go with that. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is about form. Not about form, it's about function. Fads and fashions are usually referring to design elements, superficial visuals like bell bottoms and miniskirts and tattoos. Fads do not apply to groundbreaking scientific inventions, ladies and gentlemen. Fads are inconsequential and superficial design elements. Of course they come and go because they don't mean anything. They have nothing to do with the design and use of the product. Self-defrosting fridges was a scientific invention. The current fad, everybody having stainless steel on that is a fad, ladies and gentlemen. Electric cars are not about exterior appearance. It is not a fad. My second point, which is going to refute some of their others, let's talk about the early success of any innovation. The numbers aren't that great yet, we know that, but that's not the point. The question is which direction the sales are going. If it's a fad, sales would be going down. If it's not a fad, sales will be going up, and we all know that sales of electric vehicles are going up. Early airplanes were scoffed at. Nobody would go in an airplane when they first came out. Nobody would buy anyone. Nobody would go anywhere in it. Early mobile phones weighed 2.5 pounds. You'd be looking. Nobody had them. They were useless. The early computers didn't have market acceptance. They were looked upon. They were dismal. They didn't work. Nobody had internet. Had very low penetration when it started. That's how these things start, ladies and gentlemen. They laughed when the Japanese car makers came here and started to make small 4-cylinder engine cars. They laughed. Nobody had them. Now everybody's driving them. So was that a fad? I guess they could have said it was a fad then, but only the retrospective of time can you decide whether or not something is a fad. And by placing this debate in the now, currently, the government has also really almost negated the point of this debate. Just because electric vehicles get small percentage of sales now, it doesn't mean it's a fad. 1% of homes in 1950 had television sets. That was a fad then, I guess, but it wasn't a fad then. And only time can tell you whether something was a fad. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have some real facts and figures here. There were 9 plug-in vehicle models last year. There's 19 now. I guess it's a fad, but it's a fad this way, not that way. Chevrolet Volt, 4 times as many cars this year as last year. J.D. Power voted it the highest ranked small car 2 years in a row. Some fad, ladies and gentlemen. Ever since this debate was announced, 38% of the articles in the Star and the Globe's automotive section have been about electric vehicles. I kept track. Also, since this debate was announced, 3 more car companies have announced plans to build electric vehicles. Some fad, billions of dollars. McMaster University just announced a $130 million project focusing on research of electric transportation. The director predicts, Ali Amadi, quote, almost all cars in North America will one way or another be electrified within the next 20 years. $130 million. And that's just one of hundreds of studies that are going all over the world. I was in Yorkdale. There was, on Sunday, there's the Microsoft new showroom, terrific. Right across is Tesla, electric vehicle. There were more people in the Tesla showroom, ladies and gentlemen, than there were in the Microsoft and the Apple showrooms together. You couldn't get in to look at their event. I guess that's a fad. They're paying millions in rent there. I guess they're pretty stupid, aren't they? Am I done? Oh, I still have a few minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, Canadian Tire has just announced plans to, they're already roughing in electric vehicle plug-ins at all of their stations and future stations along the 400 series. Another company, I'm afraid I didn't bring the name, are setting up 200 electric vehicle plug-in stations across the Trans-Canada Highway. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is a fad, then it's a fad that I want to be involved with. So once again, you cannot look at a fad by looking at what is today. It's irrelevant, and a fad is about this and this. And if it's going this way, and there's no proof that it's going that way, it's not a fad. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We'll now invite Adrian, the leader of the opposition, to question. The government seconder. Adrian's the government seconder to question the leader of the opposition, Michael, for 2 minutes. After the government seconder has finished questioning Michael, he will then present his arguments and how they fall in line with the Prime Minister's arguments for 5 minutes.
Mr. Leader of the Opposition, you mentioned that a car company named Tesla was involved in building electric vehicles. Are you aware that Tesla is almost insolvent due to their participation in this fad that we are defining?
Well, thank you for that question. If you recall, about a year and a half ago, General Motors and GM were close to bankruptcy too. I'm not really sure that's, so if you're suggesting that Tesla is as irrelevant to our economy as GM, then I'll have to agree with you. Otherwise, I think it's an irrelevant question.
I'm suggesting, would the Leader of the Opposition agree that because Tesla is primarily involved in making electric vehicles, and that's pretty much all they do, it is relevant to this debate, not the fact that they are bankrupt?
Was that a question? You're asking me if I agree with that?
I am.
No, I don't.
Mr. Leader of the Opposition, are you also aware that I believe it's Nissan in September 2012 is discontinuing their electrical vehicle program?
I'm not aware of that, but the history of the automotive business suggests that cars are automobile manufacturers are there's no Pontiacs anymore. If you've noticed, there's no Mercuries anymore. Car companies are constantly adjusting their product line to reflect market trends, and the biggest market trend that every car company
and the
is,
fact that
they're all
these
going
vehicles
into
are electric vehicles is not relevant to this debate at all.
I'm sorry?
And the fact that these are electrical vehicles which have no market in today's society is not relevant or germane at all to this conversation. We'd just like to get that on the record for the government side.
It was suggested before that, do you know anybody that has an electrical vehicle? I came here in a Prius today, so I guess the Prius just came out with a new all plug-in. Their 16th year of selling electric vehicles. They now have a plug-in version. It's the biggest car company in the world, and they are moving into electric vehicles in a big, big way.
Thank you very much, Leader of the Opposition. Madam Speaker, members of the House, the government's proposition is that electric cars are a fad. The Leader of the Opposition came up and said that it was somehow unfair that we made this a current debate. Well, not only will the government prove that electric cars have been a fad with exaggerated zeal, they'll also prove and rebut the opposition's case that this fad is going to go up and it's going to continue, and it's going to be a marvelous future where electric cars are running our roads and are being on our roads, and gasoline-powered vehicles have disappeared, consigned to the junk heap of history. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister said that various governments have thrown billions of dollars of electric cars, and electric cars have been around since 1833. And for 1833, that's almost 180 years. That's almost 180 years. It'll be 180 years next year. And how long has the push for electric vehicles happened? In the last 100 years? Say since 1900, where the first gasoline-powered vehicle, the Model T, came off the assembly line? No. This has happened, say, in the last 40 years. So in the last 180 years of the history of electric cars, only in the last 40 has there been a push for electric vehicles. And this push has coincided with the environmental movement. Now, as my colleague pointed out, electric cars aren't good for the environmental movement. One, because they rely on damaging emissions for the source of electricity. In the United States, as my partner mentioned, it relies on coal power, and coal is incredibly polluting. It is incredibly destructive to the environment. And in Ontario, for example, 54% of our energy supply, as indicated by the Ministry of Transportation, is from nuclear power. So we want to increase nuclear power to fund electrical vehicles. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. We're trading emissions for radioactive waste. It's not better for the environment, it's worse for the environment. Furthermore, as to why this fad will go down, a study in the United Kingdom led by the Institute for Carbon and Energy Reduction in Transport, affiliated with Oxford, did a study and said that one of the principal reasons for an uptake of hybrid and electric vehicles, plug-in electric vehicles, was for financial gain rather than environmental benefits. In other words, consumers were looking to save money on fuel and other charges rather than benefit the environment. And therein lies the problem with that, because in 2035, for example, the United States will be self-sufficient in oil, outpacing Saudi Arabia. So how's that going to affect prices of gasoline? How's it going to affect prices of gasoline, which will make it beneficial for people looking to save money to go out and buy these electric vehicles? It's going to keep it stable. It's going to keep it low. It's going to keep it as low as it is now. So electric cars aren't going anywhere. They're not going to be taking over the roads. They're going to stay where they are, or they're going to decline. Furthermore, Furthermore, studies have been done in order for people to really consider electric vehicles in light of the fact that this is a cost-cutting measure on purchasers' behalf as opposed to an environmental measure on purchasers' behalf. Price of gasoline will have to be the equivalent of $4 to $5 a gallon, or about $1.30 to $1.40 a liter. With the new technologies, with the new ways of exploring for natural gas, for exploring for oil, for converting oil into gasoline, that price increase isn't going to happen. And if that price increase isn't going to happen, if the convenience of electric vehicles isn't going to change, if people aren't going to buy electric vehicles because they're too expensive as it is now, and they're not going to save any money later, this fad is going to die. This fad is going to die. This fad is going to be stillborn, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Madam Speaker. For all of these reasons, electric cars are a fad. It's a response of environmentalists to try and save on emissions, and quite frankly, the emissions aren't going to be saved because of the way the power to fuel electric cars is being generated, and also because with higher gas, with better fuel economies that are being introduced, with better technologies in cars, fuel emissions are going to go down by gasoline-powered cars to begin with. For all these reasons, we beg for the House to support the government.
Thank you, Adrian. We will now welcome the opposition's seconder, Michelle, to the podium to question the government's seconder for 2 minutes. And then after that, once again, Michelle, the opposition's seconder, will point out how her and the leader of the opposition are correct, and how the government is incorrect. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Member of the Government, how's your hearing today?
Sorry?
Thank you. That's my point exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, we heard him say, I've got to quote you here, Mr. Member of the Opposition, that my partner, who can be flowery in this language, did he really say that electric vehicles have a marvelous future running our roads and that gas vehicles will be the junk heap of history?
I do not recall answering that question in that way. However,
Did you never? No. Did he say that?
I believe he did.
Well, you said it, sir. But I don't remember him saying it, and my hearing's pretty good. Next up, I'm curious about your crystal ball. I'm really curious, because you said that big oil is going to lower prices in the future because the U.S. is going to control big oil. And big oil, in my understanding, likes to jack up the prices. So I'm curious how your crystal ball can predict this drop and decline in prices.
I believe my response was that because the United States was going to be self-sufficient, that gasoline prices would be at the very least stable, which means that the current level of electric
How can
cars
they be
being
stable
sold-
when prices for exploration of oil continue to rise? Just as food continues to go up in price, how can the actual pulling of the oil out of the ground, the natural disasters that happen in the Gulf of Mexico, how will that decrease the price?
Madam,
I'm just curious about your crystal ball.
I'm curious that there must be a different crystal ball that the leader of the opposition is using when he says that electric cars.
I'm
will be
also
taking
curious.
off
Thank you
in
very
the
much.
future.
Thank
Maybe
you.
It's the same crystal ball
Thank
that
you
he's
very
using.
much, Mr. Member of the Government. I'm also curious, 1833 is the first electric vehicle. Where was that, sir?
I don't think.
Because both of you and your colleague quoted 1833. Where was that? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, 1828 was the year of the first vehicle. It was in Hungary. The next vehicle, reported electronic vehicle, was in Scotland in 1832. The next one, 1835 in Holland. There was also one in 1835 in Vermont in the United States. If we just look at that, ladies and gentlemen, the first vehicles were, yes, gentlemen, over 180 years ago. But, however, they're still continuing to sell. There might have been 1 or 2 sold in the 1830s, and now we are looking at over 40,000 sold in 2012. And that number is just projected to grow up, to continue to grow. As the Leader of the Opposition pointed out, 9 vehicles introduced in 2011, 19 vehicles introduced in 2012. Depending on which report you read, 32 vehicles in 2013 and 47 vehicles in 2014. These are not numbers, ladies and gentlemen, that are going down. They're not declining, they're continuing to rise. If we look at just that brief history, and we look at the history of the electric car, 1900 was mentioned by the government, ladies and gentlemen, as being the year that gas cars came into being. And I'm going to argue that 1899 and 1900 were actually the 2 years in the United States where e-vehicles were at their peak. Why were they at their peak? Because they were big, they were flashy, they were cool, and they were sold to the rich. They were sold in New York City, they were sold as taxi cab, they were built in the United States. Anybody with money wanted one of these vehicles. They were quiet, you didn't have to shift, and your chauffeur liked driving them. What happened? Big oil knocked them down. This again happened in 1996. Same sort of situation. Electric vehicles, there's a movie out there, Who Killed the Electric Car? Electric cars were huge in 1996, and they're projected to continue to grow. The mere fact that we are having this debate, ladies and gentlemen, the mere fact that Canadian Tire and other companies are introducing plug-in chargers across the 400 series highway, that's expensive money. Yorkdale is a mint. Yorkdale real estate costs a mint. The mere fact that this is happening speaks to the fact that there is an issue. Now, if we look at investments in electronic vehicle technology, because I know the government is madly whispering there to talk about, well, if it went down in 1900, it's going to go down again. The most investment in electronic vehicles, ladies and gentlemen, is coming from big oil. It's being driven by governments. It's being driven largely in Europe, where they've got stringent greenhouse gas emissions, restraints. It's also been driven in the U.S. and it's been driven in Canada. BC, not surprising, Ontario and PEI being the 3 big provinces that are driving the push towards electric. Why is big oil involved? There's a lot of skepticism around that. There's a lot of, they're not really involved in this. Yes, they derive the bulk of their revenues from oil exploration, extracting that oil and selling it at a tremendous profit. Yes, there are problems with fossil fuels. Absolutely, there's a problem. And environmentalists, which is the big argument from the government, yes, they don't like that. Absolutely. But what big oil is doing is they're investing billions and billions of dollars. Over the past, it goes back to 2005, they're investing billions of dollars on renewable energy sources. What's that doing? That's giving us a different way to fuel our homes as opposed to just gas or electric. Why are they doing that? Sounds good in a PR press release, doesn't it? Yes, PR is part of it. Also pride. What's coming up? What's bubbling below the surface, just like it did with the text message 20 years ago, and just as it did with all of the advancements that have come with mobile phones and with, as the Leader of the Opposition has mentioned, what's bubbling up is that we are going to have to find alternative energy sources. 20 to 30 years, 40 years. What is it about big oil? Pride. If they're not involved in that revenue source, they are not going to be very happy. They're going to look like fools, and that's not going to work for them. The other big driver in our society is, aside from energy sources, data collection. Data is big money. Just look at what Google's doing. Just look at what Facebook is doing. Just look what's happening with the amount of data that's being collected. All that data has to be stored. It's stored in the cloud. That needs to be powered, ladies and gentlemen. And what renewable energy sources driven by the electric vehicle, what that does is it gives us an opportunity to reuse that energy, which does not exist with the gas-powered vehicle. So it's solving multiple problems, it's solving trends happening in society, it's pushing through, and at the very bottom, this is about scientific advancements that is happening. Scientific advancements in the world. We're looking at different ways to renew energy, we're looking at different styles, we're addressing environmental concerns, and we're addressing very deep, serious demands that are happening within our society. Electronic vehicles are not a fad. They are not a fad. Ladies and gentlemen, they're here to stay. Woo! That's hard when that bell rings. Thank you very much. Please support the opposition.
Thank you, Michelle. We will now welcome the Prime Minister for 2 minutes to question Michelle, the opposition seconder. Dave?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Member of the opposition. So if you're saying that electric cars have been around for 180 years and last year we sold 40,000, according to government targets, we need to sell 12 million of them within the next 8 years. So how are we going to get to that number if it's not exaggerated interest?
We're actually at the first stage of the early adoption phase for this electric, for EVs, roughly 13.5% of the cars sold. We're moving into the early majority, which will hit 34% in the next 10 years.
So if that's the case, then, and you mentioned that electric vehicles are being driven by Europe, then why is the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, revising her prediction of sales downwards from 1 million in Germany down to 600,000, and in the meantime, only 5,000 are actually on the roads? Why are they revising it downwards?
I think because the Germans buy their cars in Hungary. So they're not actually buying the cars in Germany, they're buying in the next country.
If Europe was leading the charge, they're revising it downwards. So clearly they realize it's not gaining the momentum they expected.
Germany's also in a bit of an economic situation which is precarious, and she's probably referring to overall car sales in the country, which of course both would be impacted.
Let's get back to that crystal ball that you were mentioning.
So
This crystal ball that you have, that they talk about big oil and how it's going to impact. Well, if big oil has knocked down gas prices and therefore the demand for electric vehicles before, why couldn't it not do that again?
actually supply and demand knocked down those prices. We did, because we were looking for alternative energy sources. We were looking at e-vehicles, which drove down demand.
But we're looking at them now, and it knocked it down last time.
And we were also looking at biking and cycling and public transit versus.
Are those not options now?
They're
What's happened
options
before
and
can happen again. That's the point.
And actually, public transport is moving towards electric vehicles too.
And finally, this drive, even among the Ontario government, to commit to these electric vehicles, well, why would they commit $80 million to this program? And yet in 2012, because of the budget concerns, they actually reduced their incentives down to $43 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We will now move to the next part of the debate, the summations. We welcome the Leader of the Opposition, Michael, to begin. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, fads are about form and style. This debate is about function and substance. Fads are about visual augmentation, where design is not relevant to the use. Pet rocks, mini skirts, those were fads. Electric vehicles are a new scientific revolution in the early developmental stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the government gave us 3 main arguments, which we predicted. They talked about the cost and the low sales figures. Ladies and gentlemen, those 2 correlations are what any new invention goes through. We've mentioned a whole bunch of them already. I'm not going to repeat it. Low sales, and then slowly those 2 things, and you only have to look at televisions and computers to know that we're right about that. Now here's the essence of this debate, ladies and gentlemen. Did anybody else notice that the government never mentioned what the sales figures were for electric vehicles? And did they, a debate about fads is only about sales figures. That's all it's about. Ladies and gentlemen, they did not prove or even suggest that the sales of electric vehicles are not going up. And don't forget, we don't have to prove that everybody will be driving an electric vehicle someday. All we have to prove is that the trend is going up. That's it. If it's going up, it's not a fad. The debate's over, we can go to the bar. Ladies and gentlemen, virtually every car company is working on or already has an electric vehicle on the market. That alone should win us the debate, ladies and gentlemen. We're not talking about miniskirts here. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars. Fads are not important to our future. Electric vehicles and transportation are. Is utilizing electric vehicles to reduce the pollution and global warming a fad? Is trying to save our planet a fad? Ladies and gentlemen, we don't think electric vehicles and saving our planet, and attempts to save our planet, even if it's in the early stages, is a fad, and we don't think you do either. Thank you.
We will now welcome the Prime Minister to summarize his arguments with a summation for 2 minutes. Dave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition is trying to redefine what fad is. We're not talking about mini skirts. We're not talking about self-defrosting refrigerators here. We're talking about a practice or interest followed for a time with exaggerated zeal. And the fact is that the government says we haven't mentioned any sales numbers. Well, we did. We mentioned the sales numbers that there were 193 electrical vehicles sold last year. It doesn't matter how many billions of dollars governments and business spend. It comes down to customers talking with their wallets. If they buy it, then they will become mainstream, and if they don't, they're a fad. And obviously, with the revised numbers downwards in Europe, the governments are realizing that they're not being adopted as per all of the interest, the exaggerated interest that governments had in electric cars. It doesn't matter in terms of the level of the interest that the government first had. Even the Ontario government is reducing its commitment to electric vehicles from $80 million to $43 million. Obviously, they recognize it's not being adopted by consumers, not nearly as much as when they first had set out this grand vision of 5% of all vehicles on the road within 8 years. The opposition has not told us how they're going to sell 12 million electric vehicles within 8 years when the number was 40,000 that they presented. I go back to the environmental benefits also being exaggerated. Labor-intensive production and shifting of the emissions from tailpipes to central generating stations. When all of our electricity comes, well, a vast majority, 69.5% of electricity, comes from fossil fuels, how can we say electric vehicles are cleaner? There are other options out there that are being pursued. Electric vehicles, despite the gigantic investment that are being put into it, consumers aren't buying it. Therefore, electric cars are a fad. We ask you to support the motion. Thank you.
I will now welcome Jerry, our adjudicator, for the cross-examined debate to present the results of the debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we've certainly all learned a lot about electric cars, e-cars as they were called. I certainly had no clue that they started back in 1828 or 1833, as the case may be. Learned a lot. We listened to a very interesting debate. The government put forth that this was definitely a fad. They were saying environmental issues were exaggerated. It was certainly not adopted by consumers, therefore that makes it a fad. And it's also like a novelty thing to say you have an energy efficient car so that you can look good, to the green community. The Leader of the Opposition then came up and gave us some decent rebuttal, saying that, it's great to have electric cars, but where does that electricity come from? Coal and fossil fuels, which doesn't really help the environment at all. And that was a big part of their argument. The seconder for the opposition followed that up and said that as well.
I mean, for the government.
The government said that.
The government made those points, Chair.
Yes, okay, I'm sorry.
You said the Leader of the Opposition.
I'm sorry. Am I looking,
Sorry to adjudicate the adjudicator.
the wrong piece of paper out, that's what happened. Sorry about that. All right, let's back
It gives us points.
the horse up. Okay. Oh boy, that's bad. The Leader of the Opposition, Michael, came in and said that fads are superficial. And he gave us a lot of documentation, mini skirts, all the stuff he was talking about. Planes, computers, phones, he pointed out that they were not popular at the beginning, and they were very expensive to start with, just like electric cars now. But as time went on, of course, they came, and everybody has one, and the prices have gone way down. So that was a big point in saying that a fad is something that doesn't last very long, and this is certainly not fitting that description. He said that there's a lot of public visibility right now. He talked about the Tesla showroom. He talked about articles all over the place about electric cars, money from universities going into research, Canadian Tire, all that stuff, plugins happening in the future expansion of Canadian Tire. And that was, there were some very good points there. Adrian then came in and said the things that I said that Michael said before.
If you gave him marks, we'll take it.
Some good points there, very good points. Adrian said that, and again, I'll repeat myself, but his biggest point was electric cars still need electricity. Electricity comes from fossil fuels and coal, which does not help the environment. That was his main point. Finally, and I'll get the right piece of paper here, Michelle came up, the seconder for the opposition, and her first thing that she said, 1828, not 1833, she obviously had her facts down solid. She then came in to back up the leader of the opposition. She said 9 to 19 to 32 to 47, so an ever-increasing number of models of electric cars are being produced. She then pointed out what happened with electric cars that were really big around the turn of the century, but they were stomped on by big oil. And now, she also pointed out that the oil companies are starting to pour millions of dollars, billions of dollars into research for the future, because they can see that electric cars, as Michelle said, are not a fad. They're here to stay, so they're putting good money into future research. They're not going to be left by the wayside when and if gasoline cars are not as popular as electric cars. They want to stay on the bandwagon. It was a very good cross-exam. All four people cross-examined, had some really good questions, and all four people really weathered the storm well when they were answering the questions. The final numbers are with my partner. I'm just tallying them up right now. And the final numbers are opposition 74, government 53. And the best debater, Michelle. I'm not sure which is which, so.
Michael needs to be here too.
And as for the popular votes, Margie?
Popular vote went with the adjudicators. Opposition 11 to government 6.
Well, that concludes our debate for tonight. Thank you for watching. And good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
What were the numbers?
74.
74 to 53. Thank you.
Really great.